We good? Yep. Good evening, everybody. Can everybody hear me okay? Is that okay? Yep. Welcome, and thank you all for coming. Great to see so many of you here on a dark, dreek winter night in Edinburgh. Welcome to the second of our autumn series, as we're billing it, on the subject of conflicts of interest, which is going to autumn series, but it's going to run into next year, and on towards the formal coming into effect of the package of provisions, which we have introduced and publicised on the subject of conflicts of interest. Very brief introductions, if I may. I'm not an actuary. I usually start by saying that. I'm a lawyer. I'm General Counsel here at the Institute and Faculty of Actuaries, along with Douglas Morrison on my right, Graham Everness on my left, and Eleanor Turnbull, who is a solicitor in our team here, who is lurking at the back. We are all members of the Working Party, which is substantially responsible for the conflicts of interest package, which has been a package of provisions which has been published. Douglas, you'll be reassured to know if you don't already, is an expert actuary and specialises in the life area. Graham, for his part, a pensions actuary. The idea behind this evening is to give you something of an overview of the package, but not to emphasise that element of, not to go back over the provisions in any great detail. They are out there, they're published, and we'd be very happy to answer questions you may have on them, but rather actually for this evening's purposes to focus on generating discussion around the practical application of those provisions, what they mean in real life. And we've got some case studies which we hope you'll find stimulating, engaging. And in the second part of the session, from about 6 o'clock or so, the idea is to invite you to break into smaller groups to discuss those case studies and then to come back into plenary to talk about them with us and with a view to stimulating some debate. We've got quite a packed schedule. The emphasis will be on the interactive element, the case studies, and for that reason, although we have some slides and quite a number of them, we're going to do our very best to rattle through them relatively quickly. The slides will be made available to you if you want them. We're happy to discuss their content offline, but with the very much the focus on the interactive content. Okay, without further ado then, if I may just say a word or two by way of introduction to the material itself. You'll be aware, of course, of the importance of conflicts of interest. I suspect people are fully aware of why we're focusing on it. It goes to the heart of the professional role for any profession, including my own, and included within that actuaries who, like other professionals, occupy a privileged position of trust. The fundamental principles set out in the Actuaries Code, including at Principle 3, the principle that members will not allow bias, conflicts of interest, or the undue influence of others to override their professional judgment. That's the articulation of the fundamental impartiality principle that has been in place for some time. There is a long history. I'm not going to trouble you with the long history, other than to say the immediate chronology is that actually the following a history which goes back to the Morris report back in 2005, considerable amount of work since then, work by the Working Party. I've gone too quickly. In any event, can I go back, Douglas, please?
Possibly, yes.
Let's left arrow.
What about the left?
Okay, let me continue in the interests of brevity. Following a great deal of work and discussion around the subject, which thank you very much, which followed on from the Morris Review in conjunction with our oversight body, the Financial Reporting Council. Working Party was convened, proposals were put together, package was published earlier this year and will come into full effect in the middle of next year. The guidance, the substantial guidance, is already out there and builds on the Actuaries Code. What is the package? Very briefly, It should be viewed as a whole rather than selected components in isolation. It builds on the actuary's code and the key high-level principles which are already there, to which I've alluded. It supplements the actuary's code with specific regulatory provision in the areas particularly of life and pensions. The pensions provisions being contained in APS P1, life in APS L1, with additional regulatory guidance, a substantial guidance document, which, as I've already alluded to, has been published. It's not mandatory in the sense of being rules, but is intended to assist you in interpreting and applying what can be very difficult decisions, calling for the exercise of professional judgment in the terms of the way you apply the principles in the code to real-life situations. There is in addition to the guidance for actuaries, for you as members, there's a note for pension scheme trustees in order to assist you in your communication and the way in which you work with pension scheme trustees. And to follow, and this is will be hot off the press and work in progress, a guide for employers of actuaries on conflicts of interest, emphasising the importance of the employer's role in supporting actuaries in their employment in relation to this issue. The whole thing underpinned by new CPD, professional skills training, including the current, this event and other similar events, and rolling forward to substantial new professionalism material, which is going to be unveiled going into 2013. We additionally proposed to produce what we're referring to as a toolkit for firms, all part of the sort of regulatory support package, if you like, which will include, in fact, these slides, other material, which firms can take away and use for the purposes of their own internal training around this subject, so that we can assist you in the work you're doing in-house with your own people. The point about conflicts of interest, if you like, is, of course, different practice areas raise different specific issues, different circumstances raise different particular issues, but there are core principles which we think are applicable across the piece, fundamentally derived from the obligation of any professional, including actuaries, to act in the best interests of each of their clients and to maintain appropriate professional objectivity in the way they do that. And not just in achieving that, but in the way you are perceived to do that. And those concepts and principles, I think, go to the heart of the debate around conflicts of interest and the way in which they're applied in practice. And I've already referred to, I'm slightly trigger happy with the slides, already referred to the Actuaries Code as setting out the overarching principles. Just to mention, there is a review of the code ongoing. Watch the space in that respect, but we don't expect that will fundamentally change in any way the provisions in relation to conflicts of interest. Our focus now, having settled the approach we intend to take from a regulatory point of view, is to engage with you as members, with other stakeholders, about what this means in practice, how you apply principles around conflicts of interest in real life situations. And on that note, if I may pass to Douglas to tell you a little bit more about the life provisions. Thank you.
Sven, good evening, everyone. The Life Practice Standard, APSL 1, that was issued last year, includes a section on conflicts of interest, which is a very slightly sort of beefed up version of what was in the old guidance note. And the conclusion that we came to as a working party was that there was really neither a need for further very sort of specific regulation on conflicts of interest on the life side, nor would anything like that really achieve any great purpose. So there isn't actually an awful lot I want to say just now, because we do want to leave time at the end for the case studies. Why did we reach that conclusion? There was more than one reason, really. Firstly, life is a practice area that is in many ways subject to a lot of regulation already, FSA regulation. things have also moved on a lot since the problems with equitable life. There is a sort of governance regime for life business that to a large extent is actually designed to reduce some of the problems of conflicts of interest. The old appointed actuary regime has been replaced by separate actuarial function holder with profits actuary roles. We have the board now being responsible for valuing the liabilities, with the actuarial function role being to recommend a basis and to carry out the valuation in accordance with the basis that the board sets. The valuation is subject to audit, with the auditor advised by a reviewing actuary. As well as the with profits actuary advising on with profits business, there's the requirement for there to be external for there to be some sort of form of independent advice in addition, so potentially through a with profits committee or the like. The other sort of main consideration really is that we weren't suggesting that somehow life practice no longer has conflicts of interest for that reason, but the nature of the sort of conflicts of interest that do arise is, I think, tends to be such that they're not really amenable to being dealt with by firm regulation. They tend to be more of the sort of conflict between doing what's professionally the right thing and perhaps shorter term commercial pressure. As I say, you can't really regulate against such things beyond, I think, or much beyond what's been done in the sort of structure of the regime that has been set up. So those residual sort of conflicts of interest in life work seem to be more of this general nature. So obviously the Actuaries Code applies, and it's not obvious that any very specific further regulation or guidance would really help further there. I mean, just moving on briefly to what is in APSL 1 on conflicts. You're clicking away there, Ilona, nothing is happening. So let me
We'll
click a few till we get to there. I mean, you're always able to read the practice standard as I am, so I won't talk through all of it. But I mean, just as a brief reminder that the practice standard includes a reminder that there's actually the FSA regulations and the supervision manual flag the need for actuaries, AFH and with profits actuary to be able to operate objectively and without conflicts of interest. There are restrictions on the roles that you can combine with, especially with the with profits actuary role. So, for instance, you can't be the finance director as well as being the with profits actuary. But the practice standard, if you like, goes a bit beyond this in pointing out, well, you may stay within the letter of the regulations, but there can still be problems that arise by virtue of other roles that you have or of reporting lines, and you need to be careful and potentially to take advice from an independent member if you get into such doubt about such things, depending on whether the issue is material enough. And it sort of finally alerts, especially the with profits actuary, to be wary of being asked to undertake work by the board or whatever that actually conflicts with the with profits actuary role and would prejudice the ability to do that role. And the practice standard, I mean, is aimed not, its readership, if you like, is not just AFHs and with profits actuaries, but anybody in a life office who supports either role. So that's really all that I wanted to say on the life side at the moment, other than I'm not really sort of prompting questions at this stage about it, but I think when it comes to the case study, as well as just talking about the particular case study that we have on the life side, it would be good if there's time to hear any views from life practitioners on what you see as being the sort of conflicts of interest that do arise in the course of the work. And with that, I think we'll move on to pensions, which Graham will talk about.
Thanks, Douglas.
pensions. First thing to note, the new provisions in APSP1, which are the main part of the new pensions provisions, is there's some new definitions, which probably the most important one for this purpose to latch onto is client advice. Now, client advice is pretty wide-ranging, but it's not as wide-ranging as it could be. In other words, it isn't every word ever spoken or every word ever written down by an actuary in every circumstance. So the APSP1 provisions do target quite a lot of client advice, but not necessarily everything that ever comes from the actuary. So it's worth paying some attention to that. 5.3 to 5.5 is probably the part of the APS that's had the most discussion, certainly before it came in when we were going through the consultation phase. I think it's fairly well known that we have this presumption of an irreconcilable conflict for certain types of work undertaken by the scheme actuary, and then a facility in 5.4 and 5.5 to rebut that in certain exceptional circumstances, and then to record the reasons for that. But the other sort of material thing that I suspect people have been grappling with in relation to the new APS is to do with disclosure requirements and conflict management plans, where we've got 5.2 and 5.6. Now 5.2 is a fairly broad in its scope in terms of what it actually covers, but not very deep. In other words, a very limited disclosure requirement covering any circumstances in which your employer is involved with the employer at all. So that's fairly light touch, but very wide-ranging. 5.6 is much deeper, if we go on. 5.6 is much deeper, but applies less frequently. In other words, only when the scheme actuary's firm is involved in this concept of client advice by members of the profession to both the trustees and the employer. And I think probably in practice, for most schemes, it's been 5.6 and the need for the conflict management plan that's given rise to most work or most change, rather than the 5.3 to 5.5 issue, which for most schemes probably wasn't an issue because that sort of advice was already not being done by the scheme actuary. So I think 5.6 has been one of the main practical issues. There's quite a lot of detail in APSP1 about what's to be included in the conflict management plan, and the particular thing to highlight is that the trustees must not be bulldozed into signing it by the employer or the actuary or anybody, and the scheme actuary has an obligation or a responsibility to make sure that they've been adequately informed in getting there. Section 5, in essence, applies just to scheme actuaries, the scheme actuary schemes, but the principles are then carried forward in one form or another to all other types of actuary working on pension schemes. 6.4 is a fairly narrow in its application, in that it just brings in those people who are outside the scheme actuary's firm who might have a conflict in relation to advice to both the trustees and the employer. So quite a restricted application there, just to square the circle, really. 6.5 to 6.7 is the more direct application to scheme actuaries number 2 and others in his or her firm, essentially making them subject to similar requirements in relation to not providing advice on the main potentially conflicted areas, the funding and benefits to both the trustees and the employer. But there are some subtle differences, and there's a little bit more scope for the non-scheme actuary, for the the number 2 or whatever, to do a bit more, such as mechanical calculations, which the scheme actuary would generally be debarred from doing by APSP1 unless the rebuttable circumstances are applied. And then 6.8 extends the principles to non-scheme actuary schemes to the extent that they're considered appropriate or relevant. And in principle, that could be all sorts of schemes. So that could be local government type schemes which don't have scheme actuaries in the UK, could be unregistered and non-registered schemes, could be overseas schemes. So potentially wide ranging, but the key there is that the principles have to be applied in an appropriate way to those particular circumstances. And there we are. We have the same question really as with life that Douglas raised, and when you're thinking about the case studies, that's the same issue. If things occur to you as you go through that are actual and potential conflicts that you want to raise in relation to the case studies or otherwise, then we will pick them up during that part of the evening. Back to you.
Thank you, Graham. Wrapping up and concluding this part of the evening, the sort of formal slide-based part of the evening, just a word about some of the other elements of the package, very, very briefly. There was a call for more guidance and CPD to support the package. Well, here we are, and here we will continue to be as we roll out these events and continue to develop them, and in particular continue to develop our bank of case studies and materials, which we intend to publish in different ways to continue to have these sorts of workshop. And I think I mentioned at the beginning the intention as we move towards the middle of next year in developing our new professionalism training regime for experienced actuaries is for that regime to have a focus, not exclusively, but to have a focus initially at least on conflicts of interest type issues. And we're working very hard on material in relation to that as we speak. So more of this to come. And I should say your feedback and as we go along, to both tonight and in the future, will be very welcome as to what would be helpful for you and colleagues as we seek to promote and debate the issues which this topic gives rise to. The guide for actuaries I've already alluded to. It was broadly welcomed in fact widely welcomed in the initial consultation. It's non-mandatory in nature. It's regulatory guidance. It's intended to stimulate thought rather than being rules. And we broadened it in the final package. The substantial guidance which was finally published was a more substantive even than the version we consulted on. It included more case studies, more detail, for example, on areas including the role and limitations of peer review in relation to conflicts of interest, the use of the Y model, and information on the critical role and limitations of information barriers as ways in which conflicts might, in certain circumstances, be capable of being managed or reconciled, not always, and the critical judgments that require to be exercised in that respect. So a lot of that material in the guidance now. I've mentioned already the toolkit. That's what we're proposing to give you, if you would like it, as a package of documentation and material to help you develop this discussion, continue this discussion within your own organisations as a starting point and to support you in doing so. The most important question in terms of the practical impact of these proposals is actually, I think, that people are aware of them. That sounds a very obvious point, but there's no point in us putting so much importance, rightly, I think, to the issue if we don't extend that debate and engage people in it, and hopefully people will want to be engaged in it and be stimulated by it. To the extent that people are aware of it, which we hope they now are, and they're considering the sorts of examples and case studies that we're seeking to promote. There are no doubt a number of issues, practical steps which require to be taken. It's an opportunity, not least even for those firms and organisations where you're already complying in a sense, and that will apply to many firms. It's an opportunity nonetheless to review your practice, which is what we collectively are seeking to do. We believe ultimately that the package is targeted and proportionate. We could have gone further. There were some calls in a number of quarters calling for us to go further. We could have gone less far, no doubt, equally. We hope we've got the balance right. The proof, of course, will be in the impact it has, and the way in which people engage with it, the way in which fundamentally it works in practice, and the way in which it is seen to work in practice from a public and user and stakeholder perspective. That's the critical test, ultimately. We think it puts us in a much stronger position in terms of explaining the approach that the actuarial profession takes to the crucial question of professional objectivity, impartiality, and the handling of conflicts of interest, not least in the eyes of our external stakeholders, including our oversight body and other interested parties. We think, furthermore, the next proposition that the guidance is relatively groundbreaking. We're not aware of other actuarial organisations who've put out such a substantial piece of work on conflicts of interest. But that isn't to say we're complacent. We were looking for feedback. We're looking to improve it. We want to continue to grow in a helpful way what we're doing here. That isn't to say we want to develop more and more regulation. In fact, there's relatively little hard regulation in this package, but actually to develop awareness and knowledge and best practice. We will be monitoring implementation. We mean that, we're serious about that. We don't mean that in a sense which should in any way be seen to be alarming. We mean it in a way that we want to get feedback on the proposals. We want to get feedback on how they're being applied, how they're working, how they're not working, and in particular, for example, around the rebuttable presumption to which Graham has alluded in APSP1. How is that being applied in practice? Is it doing the job we envisaged? Do we need to make adjustments? We envisaged that we would come and talk to you and a while after, perhaps 6 months to a year or so, after formal implementation of APSP1 in particular, in other words, during the course of 2014.